There is a building on South Cicero Avenue in Chicago that most people drive past without asking a single question. It sits on 475 acres of land. The federal government built it during World War II to manufacture engines for B-29 bombers. Its floor space covered more than 450,000 square feet. After the war ended, the government did not demolish it. They leased it to a single man, a car designer from Ypsilanti, Michigan, who told them he was going to build the most advanced automobile in American history. For 14 months, he did exactly that. Then the federal government took the building back, indicted him for fraud, and made sure he never built another car again. His name was Preston Tucker. The car was the Tucker 48. And to understand why this story matters, you first have to understand what was actually inside that factory.
I found this story because I was looking for something else entirely. I was tracing post-war federal land transfers, trying to understand how the government redistributed war production facilities after 1945, who received them, and on what terms. The further I went into those War Assets Administration records, the more I realized the real story wasn't about land at all. It was about what happens when one man uses government land to build something the existing industry has decided he is not allowed to build. In 1947, the average American automobile had a windshield made of plate glass, the kind that shatters into long blade-like shards on impact. The Tucker 48 had a windshield engineered to pop out entirely on impact, so the people inside would not be cut. The average American car had its engine mounted in the front, driving the rear wheels through a long drive shaft, a design that placed the heaviest component far from the center of gravity and made the vehicle unstable at speed. The Tucker 48 had its engine mounted directly behind the driver over the rear axle, distributing weight evenly and lowering the center of gravity across all four wheels. The average American car in 1947 had no padded dashboard, no center headlight that turned with the steering wheel to illuminate corners at night, no independent rear suspension, no passenger safety compartment designed to protect occupants in a rollover.
The Tucker 48 had all of these things. In 1947, Ford did not have them. General Motors did not have them. Chrysler did not have them. The three largest automobile manufacturers in the United States were producing cars in 1947 using essentially the same safety architecture they had used in 1937. Preston Tucker was proposing to leapfrog an entire decade of industry inertia in a single production model inside a federally owned building, with a workforce of 1,800 people already on the floor, and then the numbers stopped adding up. At least, the government's numbers did. Tucker Corporation raised approximately $28 million between 1947 and 1948. It raised this money through dealer franchise sales, independent businessmen who paid between $1,000 and $5,000 each for the right to sell Tucker automobiles in their regions, and through a public stock offering. In early 1948, the Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation. The formal indictment, handed down in June 1948, alleged that Tucker had engaged in a scheme to defraud investors of $28 million. $28 million raised, $28 million allegedly stolen. But here is what existed at the exact moment that indictment was filed. A 450,000 square foot factory, fully operational, tooling, machinery, a trained workforce of 1,800 people. 51 completed automobiles, each one functional, each one driven, each one documented, a complete engineering department, a national dealer network already in place. The government said Preston Tucker took $28 million from investors and gave them nothing. 51 cars were sitting in a Chicago factory that said otherwise. The gap between those two statements was never explained at trial, because it could not be explained. The government's own witnesses confirmed the cars existed. The government's own witnesses confirmed they ran. But the indictment was not the beginning of the story. The indictment was the end of a sequence that had started somewhere else, in a Senate hearing room in Washington. Before the SEC indictment, before the fraud charges, before any federal grand jury convened, there was a Senate investigation. Senator Homer Ferguson of Michigan opened a subcommittee inquiry into Tucker Corporation in 1948. Senator Ferguson represented Michigan. Michigan is the state where Ford Motor Company is headquartered. Michigan is the state where General Motors is headquartered. Michigan is where Chrysler maintained its primary manufacturing operations. This is not an allegation. It is a geographic fact recorded in the congressional record. The Senate subcommittee investigation came first. The SEC action followed. The War Assets Administration's decision to revoke Tucker's lease on the Chicago plant came next. The lease revocation ended production. The end of production meant no more cars. No more cars meant the franchise dealers had nothing to sell. The franchise dealers having nothing to sell became the foundation of the fraud case. Senate investigation. SEC investigation. Lease revocation. Factory closure. Indictment. That is the order in which those events occurred. It is the order preserved in the congressional record and the federal court record. It has never been disputed by anyone. Now consider what else was happening that same year, 1948. Ford Motor Company introduced its first fully redesigned post-war vehicle. General Motors was in the middle of its most profitable 5-year period in company history. The Big Three together controlled approximately 90% of American automobile sales. And in a federally owned building in Chicago, a competitor had appeared, one whose cars had already been driven by journalists, dealers, and members of the public, with 51 working vehicles and a national distribution network already assembled. One Senate investigation, one senator from Michigan, one car company in Illinois. That company never produced another vehicle, and inside that factory, one man had watched it all happen from the floor. Mitchell Dullian was Tucker Corporation's plant manager. He was not a politician. He was not a corporate executive. He was a production engineer, the man responsible for the day-to-day operation of the factory floor, for managing the 1,100 workers who built the cars, for keeping the assembly line moving. Dullian testified during the 1948 federal proceedings. He stated that the factory had been operating on schedule at the time federal investigators arrived. He noted that federal inspectors had been present inside the facility for months before any public charges were filed, embedded in the plant, observing production, recording operations. He described Tucker number 51 rolling off the line. He was not accused of any crime. He was never charged. His testimony was entered into the record of United States versus Tucker et al., case number 48 CR 312, Northern District of Illinois. That transcript is held in the National Archives. It has been there since 1950, and what Dullian described, a working factory, a functioning production line, cars being built and completed, became the foundation of what happened next in that courtroom. The trial of Preston Tucker and his co-defendants began in 1949. It lasted months. The government called witnesses, presented financial records, and argued that Tucker had never intended to build a viable automobile. The jury deliberated for 27 hours. On January 22, 1950, every defendant was acquitted. Every single charge was dismissed. Judge Walter LeBoux had instructed the jury that the government's own evidence demonstrated functional vehicles had been produced. The jury agreed. The government appealed nothing. There was no second indictment. There was no investigation into who had initiated the Senate inquiry or what communications had passed between Michigan's automotive industry and Senator Ferguson's office before that inquiry began. Those communications were never subpoenaed. They were never entered into evidence. They remain outside the public record today, and there is one more document that remains outside the public record, the most important one of all, the internal memoranda of the War Assets Administration. The specific documents recording who made the decision to revoke Tucker Corporation's lease on the Chicago plant and why have not been made public. FOIA requests filed by Tucker researchers in the 1970s and 1980s did not produce those documents in complete form. That lease revocation was the single administrative act that ended Tucker automobile production. It happened during the Senate investigation, before the SEC indictment was formally filed, before any conviction had been obtained, before any court had found that Preston Tucker had done anything wrong. Who made that decision? What information they were acting on? What communications preceded it? None of those questions are answered in any document currently available to the public, and by the time the jury delivered its acquittal in January 1950, it no longer mattered. The factory had been silent for nearly 2 years. The tooling had been removed. The workforce of 1,800 people had dispersed. The supply chain had collapsed. An acquittal in a court of law does not restart a production line. Preston Tucker knew that better than anyone. 47 of the 51 Tucker 48s survive today. They are in museums and private collections across the United States and around the world. They are functional. They are driven. You can stand next to one right now at the Gilmore Car Museum in Hickory Corners, Michigan, and look at its padded dashboard, its pop-out windshield, its center safety headlight, and understand exactly what American roads did not have in 1948. Features that would not become standard in American automobiles for another 15 to 20 years. Tucker's original engineering drawings are preserved at that same museum. The full trial transcript is in the National Archives, case number 48 CR312, and has been accessible to researchers for decades. The Chicago plant building still stands at 7401 South Cicero Avenue, repurposed, transformed, unrecognized. What is not in the public record is the War Assets Administration document that closed the factory. What is not on any memorial anywhere in the United States are the names of the 1,800 workers who lost their jobs in 1948 before any verdict, before any conviction, before any court had ruled on anything at all. Preston Tucker died on December 26, 1956. He was 53 years old. He died still working on plans to restart production. The cars are still running. The document that stopped them has never been released.